Hello again, everybody. Bobby Gaines here, longtime Red Sox fan, and I'm just so frustrated, not just about this current season, but just going back many years, about 7 to 10 years actually, of watching this Red Sox management kind of underpay or not pay at all their current roster players, people who have been successful at the big league level with Boston, and instead throwing their money at other players who maybe aren't as successful. So first I'm just going to go through the history real quick, starting in 2004, going through all the players that were free agents or whatever and left the team for various reasons. Some of them may have been minor contributors, some of them were bigger contributors. But starting in 2004, because that was the big World Series team, and I'm not saying that these players were part of the nucleus by any stretch of the imagination, but you did have Orlando Cabrera, Dave Roberts, and Doug Minkiewicz, a very important trio who came over in the Nomar Garciaparra trade to help the Red Sox in the infield, and of course Dave Roberts helped them with his feet, helped him steal that very important base. So all three of those players walked. They signed with other teams. The Red Sox don't really have another option at shortstop, so it's hard to explain why Cabrera left. But, you know, it is what it is. And then you look at some of the other players that left that team. Bill Miller, you know, certainly not an all-star, but a decent third baseman. Derek Lowe, a pretty good pitcher. They didn't even offer him anything. And Pedro Martinez, who they lost to the New York Mets. So that's just to start us off here. You know, 2005, they brought in some guys. Oh, and after this list, as I mentioned, I will be listing the guys they did sign right after listing all the guys that they haven't signed from their own roster. Now, obviously, one of the more controversial ones is Johnny Damon. The Red Sox lost Johnny Damon, a longtime Red Sox player. Actually, he'd only been there a few years, but they lost him to free agency to the New York Yankees. I can't say the exact number, but it was like a $10 to $12 million difference. The Red Sox got outbid for their own player again and said farewell to Johnny Damon. So Johnny Damon off the Red Sox. And they went through a few center fielders trying to find a good one. Luckily, Ellsbury came on the scene pretty soon after, so it kind of worked itself out. Alex Gonzalez, another decent shortstop for the '06 Red Sox. Although I guess that doesn't really count because they did re-sign him in 2009. So what does that bring us to now? Just a handful of players. And I'm going to kind of skip around here. Obviously, there have been just many other players that I could name. I'm just thinking of the significant ones that performed with Boston and then didn't get re-signed. Going on to the 2009 season, after the Red Sox had acquired Jason Bay, another really good pickup that they traded Manny Ramirez for, they let Bay walk to the New York Mets. Now, in retrospect, that seems like an okay deal because Jason Bay didn't end up performing that well, but who's to say? Who really knows? The point is, the Red Sox just kind of sat there, put their offer on the table, and left their own player, you know, kind of hanging out to dry. So Jason Bay, another one off the team. Fast forward a year, and you have Adrian Beltre and Victor Martinez, two players who also performed well in their short time in Boston. Didn't really seem to do badly under the pressure, given the circumstances. Both those players off to other teams. So, we go further a little bit more. This one's going to be a little more controversial. Some people will say they shouldn't have signed him. Jonathan Papelbon, following the 2011 season, had been a great Red Sox closer, probably the greatest ever just because the Red Sox don't keep closers long term. So, Papelbon signs with the Phillies. He's out. So, this is just a handful of names. I'm leaving some off, some that were decent players, some that were better players. Now, with the exception of Dustin Pedroia, who did sign a big-term deal recently, the Red Sox traditionally, also with David Ortiz they do this, but traditionally the Red Sox don't even offer their players a contract until they're free agents. So they wait until free agency, which is almost never a good idea. I mean, just look at the Yankees with Robinson Cano this past offseason. It was widely just expected that Robinson Cano was going to go back to the Yankees, but someone's a free agent, anything can happen. Any crazy things can happen. It's not like the NBA where, you know, Carmelo goes back to the Knicks after all that. Usually, players in Major League Baseball go to free agency for a reason, and their teams know that, and that's why they usually try to trade them beforehand. Not the case with the Red Sox. Now, let's look at some of the players the Red Sox did get to fill the gaps left by their own players who they let walk. Well, in 2005, we had Matt Clement, Wade Miller. Who am I forgetting here? That's not important. Also had Edgar Renteria off the 2004 losing World Series participant, the St. Louis Cardinals that year. But after Edgar Renteria didn't work out, and after they didn't re-sign Alex Gonzalez, they got Julio Lugo for a few years, along with Stephen Drew the very same offseason. Okay players, I'll admit, but you could also argue that they overpaid. Go a little further, you have John Lackey, another pitcher they picked up. Again, not a bad pickup, even though, you know, it's been kind of a mixed up and down thing with him. And again, you just look at some of these deals that the Red Sox have made, trying to fill the gaps left by their own players, whether they had to trade or they had to do something else. Now, Papelbon leaving was kind of an interesting situation because for 2012, they really didn't have a closer. They traded for Andrew Bailey and gave up a couple of pretty decent prospects, as Oakland is now finding out. So they didn't really get a closer to replace Papelbon until Koji Uehara stepped up in 2013 to fill the role. But at the age of 40, you can't expect him to last too long either. So basically, they're kind of screwed at that position in the next year, if not sooner. And again, looking at some of the other players that they signed, obviously I haven't forgotten about the giant juggernaut of contracts that were given to Adrian Gonzalez and Carl Crawford. Two players with high expectations, don't get me wrong, but just a ton of money. To which I say, why not just sign your own players, Boston? If you have that much money and you can really beat everyone else at free agent bidding, why let your own players go over an extra $5 or $10 million when you're willing to overpay by $50 million for Daisuke Matsuzaka and just all these other players that you don't even know that well? I know that there's scouting reports and this player's projected to do better than this one, but just use the eye test. Look at what your eyes have seen. Even if a player's not lighting up the world, I mean, players like Adrian Beltre and Victor Martinez are still somewhat hard to find in baseball these days. It's hard to find a decent power-hitting first baseman, catcher, whatever he is at this time right now, Victor Martinez. Still hard to find good defense at third base like Adrian Beltre. And I'm not saying the Red Sox should have signed each and every one of these guys, but then you look at the money that they threw into other players, giving Mike Cameron $15 million a year, giving Shane Victorino $13 million a year. And yes, I know they've had decent success, but not always. And it's just kind of frustrating to see that the Red Sox are willing to put out the money, but only for other veterans, other people on other teams, and their own players they sit and play hardball with. Now, of course, I'm talking about John Lester. And I don't know how many of you are optimistic, I'm not, that they re-signed John Lester. After hearing that they offered him, 4 years, $170 million? I'm sorry, 4 years, $70 million. Oh yeah, that's not going to get it done for almost anybody. That's James Shields money. That's, pick your pitcher. That's a generic pitcher at this point in Major League Baseball. Starting pitchers are hard to come by. You offer John Lester, your ace, your playoff ace, your proven number one, and you offer him 4 years, $70 million. First of all, what does that say to the other pitchers on your staff? Not that you really have anyone else like John Lester. Certainly Lackey at times, and Buchholz sometimes, but what does that say to them if you're only giving your ace 4 years, $70 million? On the open market, he's going to get probably close to twice that. Probably 7-8 years, $140 million. You know the Yankees will pay it. I also meant to throw Ellsbury in that list, but you could argue, that was just a ridiculous deal by the Yankees. So I don't blame the Red Sox for letting every single one of their players go, but as a fan, it is frustrating to see time and time again each successful player come up through the system or acquired through trade, show some promise, and the Red Sox don't stick with him because they're not willing to spend another $5 million, but they're willing to spend $100-something million on another player that does the same exact thing. So that's just my little rant on it. Tell me what you think. Will the Red Sox sign Lester? I hope so. Let's see what happens in the offseason, though.